Today's repair comes from a viewer named Thomas. He sent me a broken Game Boy Pocket. I've never worked in a Game Boy Pocket. He didn't send me a full Game Boy Pocket. He sent a broken motherboard and the screen. Now, I do have a few buttons lying around that might work for this. I have a few Game Boy Color buttons that might work for this. Now, the story behind it is, I guess he was cleaning it, and it dropped out of his hands, and as it fell onto the ground, his wife stepped on it and broke it in half. So yeah, we're left with this. He did say it worked before that, though. So if we can repair all these traces with confidence, it should work. Now, the break is somewhat clean. There's not a whole lot of jagged edges that interfere with it going back together. So I think the first step is to epoxy the two halves back together and then rework all of the traces. Now, these are very weird looking traces in the sense of the silk screen. As you can see here, it's like a yellow, so I'm not sure if this whole thing is probably copper. There we go. So I'm not sure if I should sand all of this down before putting it together, or put it together then sand everything down. I guess it wouldn't hurt to try sanding it down before I glue it back together. So let's go ahead and try that. When using sandpaper to remove solder mask, it's important to know when to stop. It's very easy to sand right through the conductor. I don't think I've ever seen a PCB with two solder masks. Very weird, but still fixable. I recommend wearing a mask when sanding down any PCB, as you don't want to breathe this stuff in. With all the traces now exposed, we can join the two halves using epoxy. I'm only going to use a small amount of epoxy for now, just to minimize the mess. Unfortunately, I have to hold both pieces in place while the epoxy sets.
One eternity later.
Now it's time to solder everything back together. For the ground floods of copper, I'll solder thick leads across the gap to help aid in structural integrity, and I'll use 30 gauge wire for everything else. Since I don't have a case for this yet, let me know in the comments below if you'd prefer to see this in a clear shell or a 3D printed one. I've gotten a few comments now asking for me to do tutorials for this kind of repair. What exactly would you guys like to see covered in a repair tutorial video? Let me know in the comments below. Now that every trace is repaired, we can go ahead and test it. It does look pretty bad. The reason why the solder looks more blobby in this setup than you've seen in my previous videos is because there's more copper to fill. So like for example, if we look at this solder joint right here, it looks like a giant blobby mess. That's because of the width of the copper trace I am filling solder onto. So it's going to look a little bit bad as opposed to when I would repair just a single trace that's as big as a 30 gauge wire, such as this one right here. So it looks kind of choppy, but it is the best I could do with it, I think. So let's go ahead and solder in my bench power supply to the battery tabs and see if we can get it to turn on. Okay, there's that. And now the positive one. So off camera, I'm going to turn on my bench power supply real quick and make sure it's not drawing a lot of current. If it's drawing a lot of current, then I know there's a short somewhere. Drawing nothing, which is good. So now if I turn on the switch, it should draw something. And it kind of is. Alright, let's go ahead and hook up the screen and see if that does anything. I'm going to go ahead and kill the power. Plug that in. Turn on the power supply. Turn on the switch. Alright, and nothing is happening. And we're kind of drawing some current, not a whole lot. And in the background you'll hear my very old, loud as can be dog walking across hardwood floor. And it turned on, wow, as I was talking about my dog. I wonder if this switch is defective. Alright, so what I'm going to do now is jump that switch. So I'm just going to go ahead and add some fresh solder to these pads. And then I'm going to just add like a small jumper wire across that. So I think the switch might be intermittent. Okay, so now that there is a jumper wire going across that switch, I want to see if it turns on more consistently. And it does. So I think that switch is actually defective as well because it wasn't turning on consistently with the switch thrown in the position. I think it might need a new switch. But let's go ahead and test out a game before we do that. Since this Game Boy is far from complete, it's going to need a lot of stuff, obviously. Let's go ahead and plug in this expensive copy of Frogger and see if we get a boot. And it looks like we do. Oh, that is perfect. So it is booting. Cool. Now I'm going to turn it on and test out the controls. I'm just going to use some tweezers to jump the contacts to see if I can close the switch that way. If not, I do have this little D-pad membrane I could probably use. Start by just doing start. Okay. So right works. Left works as well. Now I gotta test up and down pretty quick, I would imagine, because I don't want to. Let's see. Alright, up and down works. And I'm just going to assume A and B work as well. I don't think I can test them out with this game. I'm not sure. Probably could at some point. I'm just going to assume they work because they weren't really affected. I could probably throw in another game to make sure, but I think this is good enough. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off the power supply. Kill the Game Boy. that's it for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. I do apologize that we can't finish this in its own video. I don't have all the parts for it yet. It's going to take some sourcing to make sure I get all the mod hardware to accommodate the 3D printed shell. But I figured it was a fun video to show off as far as repairing the circuit board and seeing if it works. So stay tuned. It might be in its own dedicated video or just be like a small feature in a different repair video. Either way, it will be up and running and fully working in no time. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you guys next time.